Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop your answers and any suggestions in the comments, and I might give you a shout out at the end of my next video. Thanks for being here and for all your amazing support. I was 27 when I first walked through the gates of Clearwater Psychiatric Institute, Northern California, 1974. The building stood at the edge of the woods, a pale gray giant that seemed to breathe through the cracks of its own walls. I had just graduated medical school, full of the kind of confidence that only comes before reality sets in. Clearwater was supposed to be my first real job, a place where I'd help people recover from their worst memories. I had no idea how wrong that was. My supervisor was Dr. Gregory Hoffman, silver hair, calm voice, and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything already. He shook my hand the first day and said, "Welcome to Progress, Doctor. Here, we're not afraid of pushing limits." I didn't know what he meant back then, but I would soon find out. After a week of observing the regular wards, I was called into his office, a large room lined with files and the faint smell of chemicals. On the desk sat a folder marked Subproject 58, Confidential. He told me we'd been chosen by a federal program to test a new trauma treatment using a drug called LSD. The goal was to open the mind, he said, to let patients face and rewrite their worst memories. It sounded strange, but I trusted him. Everyone did. The experiments took place in the women's ward, always after midnight. The patients were young women who had suffered horrific abuse, people who could barely speak without shaking. I remember the first one, named Linda. They strapped her to the bed gently, like a child about to be tucked in, and Dr. Hoffman handed me a syringe filled with clear liquid. 50 micrograms, he said, enough to loosen the mind, but not shatter it. The room smelled of alcohol and sweat. The lights were dim. Hoffman leaned close to Linda, whispering softly, "You are safe. Let go." At first she smiled, slow, dreamy, then started crying, calling for someone who wasn't there. Hoffman took notes calmly, watching her eyes flick back and forth like broken camera shutters. I wanted to stop, but I didn't. Within weeks, the doses increased. Hoffman called it guided reconstruction. He said that trauma could be dissolved, it could be replaced, that pain was just a faulty memory waiting to be rewritten. He'd make the patients recount their abuse, then whisper new versions of it while they were hallucinating. He didn't hurt you, he saved you. Sometimes he'd tell them their parents were alive when they weren't. Other times he'd erase names entirely. He kept talking about cleansing the female mind of history. The things I saw still wake me at night. Women laughing while their eyes rolled white. Voices calling from empty rooms. And always Hoffman's calm whisper, "We are rebuilding them." One night I found him alone in the therapy room, the tape recorder still spinning. A woman's voice screamed on the tape, but it wasn't just pain, it was rage. Hoffman noticed me and smiled. "She broke through," he said quietly. "She saw the architecture of her memory. You will too someday." Her name was Janet, 23 years old, multiple suicide attempts. Hoffman said she was perfect for the next phase. He wanted to push the limit, 500 micrograms. I told him it was insane. He didn't listen. The night of the session, the hallways were silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Janet sat on the table, trembling. "Please don't let him do this," she whispered. But we did. As soon as the drug hit her bloodstream, her breathing changed. She began muttering, "It's coming, it's coming." Then she screamed, not from fear, but from something deeper. Hoffman leaned in, recording every second. "You're safe," he said again. Janet suddenly arched backward, clawing at her stomach. "It's here. I can feel it," she cried. Before I could move, she ripped open her hospital gown and started digging her nails into her own skin, screaming that she had to get the baby out. I tried to stop her, but Hoffman grabbed me and pulled me in front of him like a shield as she lunged forward. Blood sprayed across the walls. The camera light blinked red. There were men behind the glass, people I had never seen before, watching, taking notes. No one moved. No one screamed, except me. Then Janet collapsed, still alive, still breathing, whispering something I'll never forget. "They're still inside," she said. "They don't leave." I wanted to quit, but every time I tried, Hoffman reminded me of my contract, of the confidentiality clause signed under federal jurisdiction. "You are part of history. You can't just walk away from history." A few nights later, I noticed something odd. A door at the end of the hall that was never unlocked before. The sign read, "Archive, authorized staff only." The guard on duty had fallen asleep, so I took the chance. Inside were hundreds of folders, all marked with the same title, MK Ultra Subproject 58. Each file had names, dosages, and results. Some listed the word terminated. Others said missing. The earliest date I found was 1953, 2 decades before I ever arrived. One film reel had Hoffman's name on it. I loaded it into a projector. The footage was grainy, a different facility, same white walls. Hoffman stood next to a woman strapped to a chair, just like Janet, only younger. The date read June 1959. That's when I realized he hadn't started this project. He had inherited it. I reported everything to the chief administrator. The next morning, I was called into a meeting with 2 men in black suits. They said they were from the Department of Health, but their badges had no names. They told me I'd been transferred to a hospital in Texas, effective immediately. "Fresh opportunity," they said. "You've done great work." When I returned to my dorm to pack, all my notes were gone. My locker was empty. Janet's name was erased from the patient list. When I asked the nurse on duty, she said there was never a patient named Janet. I tried to argue, but the men were already waiting at the door. "Don't make this difficult," one said. "You've been helpful enough." That night, I boarded a small flight south. The ticket said Houston Psychiatric Research Division. My transfer papers were signed by Dr. Gregory Hoffman. Years later, I found an article buried in an old newspaper archive. Clearwater Psychiatric Institute had been shut down after a chemical spill in 1976. The land was sold to a private developer, but there was no record of the patients, the doctors, or even the existence of Ward C, where our experiments took place. I've tried to forget. I really have. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see her, Janet, standing in the corner of the room, whispering that same line. "They're still inside." I don't know who they are anymore. The government? The memories? The ones who watched behind the glass? But I know this. I still dream of Clearwater. And every time, the walls breathe a little closer. When I started my internship at Riverside State Hospital in Illinois, I thought I'd finally made it. After years of study, sleepless nights, and endless exams, I was finally inside a real psychiatric institution, a place where I could learn how to help people. Riverside was old. The kind of building that still smelled like the 1960s, metal, bleach, and a quiet sadness that never left the hallways. I was assigned to the East Wing under Dr. Harold Brennan, a senior psychiatrist with a reputation for being brilliant but cold. He walked with a limp, spoke in short, sharp sentences, and seemed to enjoy reminding interns that we were lucky just to breathe the same air as him. For the first few weeks, everything was routine. Group therapy, medication rounds, file updates, until I met Robert Garrison. Robert had been at Riverside for 11 years. He looked younger than his file said, mid-40s maybe, but his eyes had that tired, hollow look of someone who'd been emptied out from the inside. His record said he confessed to killing his wife. The case was simple, open and shut. He strangled her during an argument, then turned himself in. But something about his file didn't sit right with me. Every page looked too clean, perfectly typed, no scribbled notes, no inconsistencies. His confession transcript was word for word flawless. I'd seen enough messy casework to know that kind of perfection doesn't happen in real life. When I asked Robert about it, he looked at me like he didn't understand. "They said I did it," he murmured. "I guess I did." I asked, "You guess?" He smiled weakly. "I remember the questions more than the answers." That stuck with me. One afternoon, while filing in the archive room, I came across an old cardboard box labeled Cross Sessions 2007. Inside were cassettes, each marked with names and patient numbers. One label caught my eye: R. Garrison, hypnosis tape. I borrowed an old tape player from maintenance and listened. At first, it was ordinary. A man's voice, calm, professional, introducing himself. "This is Dr. Milton Cross, conducting therapeutic hypnosis on patient Robert Garrison, March 3rd. Then came Robert's voice, low and uncertain. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said. Dr. Cross replied softly, "Tell me what happened, Robert. You saw your wife fall, didn't you?" Robert hesitated. I think she fell." "Good," Dr. Cross said. "And then what did you do, Robert? You panicked. You grabbed her, didn't you? Around the neck." Yes," Robert said, voice trembling. "Because you were angry, weren't you? Angry that she laughed." Robert started crying. She laughed. And then Dr. Cross said the words that froze my blood. "Say it, Robert. You strangled her. You killed her. But it's okay. You were in control." Robert's voice broke completely. I killed her." The tape clicked off after that. I replayed it again and again. Dr. Cross wasn't helping him remember. He was feeding him the confession. I started digging. Dr. Milton Cross wasn't a staff psychiatrist. He'd been a consultant, hired by a private law firm for criminal rehabilitation cases. His records were limited, but I found other names linked to his hypnosis sessions. 4 men and 2 women, all convicted of violent crimes after confessing during therapy. I tracked down an old newspaper article. One of the cases had been appealed years ago. The defendant claimed his confession was hypnotically implanted. The appeal was denied. Dr. Cross's testimony was called expert and credible. But then I noticed something else. Every case he'd handled had been connected to the same law firm, Brennan, Cross, and Associates. The same Brennan who now ran Riverside. I went to Dr. Brennan's office the next day with the tape in hand. He didn't even look surprised when I mentioned Cross's name. "Old history," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We used different methods back then you wouldn't understand." "You manipulated confessions," I said. "You put innocent people away." He gave a small, amused smile. "Innocent? There's no such thing in this place. Everyone here has done something, if not to others, then to themselves." I told him I was going to report it. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes cold. "Then you should do that. but you'll never find the original evidence. It's gone." When I left his office, the tape was missing from my pocket. A week later, I came in for my night shift. The ward was quiet. Too quiet. Robert's room door was closed, marked no entry. I asked the nurse what happened. She said emergency surgery. Something about pressure on the brain. Surgery? He wasn't even on a surgical list. I ran to the records. There it was, freshly added. Emergency transorbital lobotomy authorized by Dr. H. Brennan. I froze then. That procedure wasn't legal in decades. When I tried to access his digital file, it was gone. Every entry related to Robert Garrison deleted. His name didn't exist in the system anymore. The next day, Brennan called a meeting. He announced that Robert had suffered an irreversible psychotic breakdown and would remain in permanent care. No one questioned him. But I saw Robert that night, through the small window of his room. He was sitting on the bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. A thin line of dried blood ran down his temple. He didn't speak, didn't blink. His hands twitched in slow, repetitive movements, like he was typing on invisible keys. I was dismissed 2 days later. Official reason: administrative non-compliance. My access badge stopped working, and my internship certificate was never issued. I tried to go public, but every journalist I contacted ignored me. One of them told me privately that Riverside had federal oversight, meaning off limits. For years I tried to move on, took small counseling jobs, tried to bury the memory. Until one morning, nearly 5 years later, I got a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a tiny plastic bag. The paper was from a hospital notepad, Riverside letterhead. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It read, "They paid him for satisfaction. He made me remember what never happened." The plastic bag held a small metal tag, the kind they attach to patients' wrists. The engraving read, "Garrison R. deceased." I don't know who sent it. Maybe a nurse who remembered me, maybe Brennan himself, mocking me. But I realized what had really happened. Robert never killed his wife. He was hypnotized, manipulated into confessing something that wasn't true, so Brennan's firm could close the case cleanly. Dr. Cross implanted the murder story using suggestion, reward, and guilt. Then Brennan kept Robert institutionalized to make sure he never spoke again. And when I got too close to the truth, they shut me out. 2 years ago, I drove back to Riverside. The hospital had been renamed Riverside Behavioral Complex and looked freshly renovated, but the East Wing, where Robert's room used to be, was closed off, supposedly for construction. Through the window, I saw flickering lights, like an old projector running. The hallway was empty, except for one figure sitting by the wall, a man in a hospital gown, staring at his hands. When he turned his head slightly, I saw a faint scar over his eye, and though his face was pale and aged, I knew. It was Robert. He didn't move as I called his name, but before I left, he looked up at the glass, and for a second, his lips moved. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew what he said. "I didn't do it." Then the lights went out. A month later, a friend from my internship called me, one of the ones who still worked at Riverside. She told me something strange. During a maintenance inspection, a wall panel had come loose in the old therapy room. Behind it, they found dozens of cassette tapes stacked neatly in a box labeled Archive 12. Most of the labels were missing, but one still had writing. Session 43, Brennan, Self. It hit me then. Dr. Brennan had been hypnotized too, maybe by Cross himself. Maybe he wasn't just covering for Cross. Maybe he was another subject. Maybe all of them were. Sometimes when I lay awake at night, I hear that faint clicking sound again. The tape turning over, the soft hum of a machine still recording. I think about how many people sat in that room, staring at the ceiling,
their real lives erased by a voice whispering things that never happened. I don't know how many tapes are still out there, or who has them now, but I do know one thing. Every time someone says, "Memory never lies," I remember Robert Garrison, because I saw what happens when memory is rewritten, and it looks a lot like murder.
I took the job at Penhurst Hills Institute in the summer of 1955. It was my first steady work after years of odd repair jobs and long nights on the road. They said the institute was a state-of-the-art psychiatric facility, but when I first saw it, it looked more like a fortress, a mountain of stone buried in fog. They needed a maintenance man for the night shift. I thought it would be easy money. I was wrong. My name is Thomas O'Connell, and I've been working the night shift ever since. Every night began the same way. I'd clock in at 11 p.m., sign the logbook, grab my flashlight, and check my clipboard. The list never changed. Door 47A, door 47B, door 47C. Each marked basement wing structural integrity check. The night warden, Mr. Alastair Reed, reminded me constantly, "Never unlock the doors, Thomas. Just check the hinges. Listen for any audible distress." I asked once what that meant. He smiled. "You'll know it when you hear it." I thought it was a joke. The basement wing was a maze, damp, silent, and too cold for summer. The concrete walls always leaked, and the lights hummed like dying bees. But what bothered me most was the sound, a faint rhythmic ticking that followed me no matter where I went. The first few nights were quiet, but on the fifth night, when I reached door 47A, I heard something faint behind it. At first, I thought it was a radio, a man's voice humming an old tune, something from the 1930s. I leaned closer, trying to make out the words. Then the humming stopped, and a voice whispered, "Shifts over, Tommy." My name. I dropped the clipboard and ran back to the security office. Warden Reed barely looked up. He said, "Don't run in my halls." I stammered, "There's someone down there, a man behind a door." He sighed, "No one's down there but the past." Then he turned the page of his logbook and said, "Go back, finish your round." So I did. When I passed 47A again, it was silent, but the air smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, old, stale, decades old. A week later, the warden told me to double-check 47B. He said, "The typewriter's acting up again." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Typewriter?" He didn't answer. That night I pressed my ear against 47B, and sure enough, there was a sound, faint clicking, like something keys striking paper, steady, rhythmic. I tried the handle, locked. When I looked down, I saw fresh dust around the hinges, like the door had been opened recently. I wrote it on my clipboard, "Sounds of typewriter behind 47B, no entry." The next night I checked again. The sound had changed. The typewriter was slower, uneven. Then it stopped completely, followed by a faint scratching sound, like someone erasing words. When I came back to the office, the warden was gone, but my clipboard was on his desk. My note had been erased, replaced by a single sentence written in perfect mechanical handwriting. "Do not interrupt the work." 2 weeks later, I noticed something wrong with the clocks. The walk from the boiler room to the north stairwell usually took 5 minutes, but that night it felt longer, endless. When I checked my watch, 45 minutes had passed. Yet when I reached the top of the stairs, the clock in the office still read 11:12 p.m. I thought my watch was broken until I realized the date had changed to October 41. I laughed nervously and reset it, but the next morning the date stayed the same. The third door was the worst, 47C. There were no sounds behind it, no movement, just heavy, suffocating silence. When I leaned close, I could feel cold air seeping through the cracks. Not a draft, but something colder, older. I knocked once, half-jokingly. Something knocked back. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I stumbled back and dropped my flashlight. The light flickered once, and for a moment I thought I saw something on the wall. Shadows, like people standing shoulder to shoulder, waiting. When I told the warden, he just smiled. The night shift keeps you company, doesn't it? That same night, I looked through the old logbook stored in the cabinet. The newest entry, before mine, was dated October 41, the same date on my watch. The entry read, Thomas O'Connell, assigned to night maintenance. Duties, 47A, 47B, 47C. I froze. It was written in my handwriting. I decided to quit, but when I told Warden Reed, he only smiled. You can't quit, Thomas. The shift never ends. Didn't you read your contract? I didn't sign anything like that. He slid the clipboard toward me. My signature was at the bottom, the ink still fresh. I backed away. I'm done, I said. He stood slowly. You've already done this, every night since 1941. Then he handed me his clipboard. The checklist was identical to mine, except the final line, written in red ink. Subject 47T. Observation complete. That's when I understood. I wasn't the maintenance man. I was the observation. The next night I came back anyway. Maybe I was afraid. Maybe I just wanted to prove it was all in my head. But the halls were darker. The lights barely worked. The air felt heavy, thick with humidity and age. And when I reached door 47B, I heard the typewriter again, only faster now, like it was racing to finish something. I peered through the peephole. Inside was a small, empty room with a single desk, and on it, a typewriter typing by itself. The page read, I have been here since the shift started. The keys stopped for a second, then typed again. Look behind you. I turned slowly. The warden was standing at the end of the hall, holding a clipboard. His face was blank, like a wax mask. You're late for your inspection, he said. When I looked back through the peephole, the room wasn't empty anymore. There was a man sitting at the desk, typing. He looked exactly like me. That was decades ago, or maybe last night. I don't know anymore. The clocks at Penhurst don't move right. The sun never rises the same way twice. And every night at 11 o'clock sharp, the warden hands me the same clipboard and says the same words. Check the doors, Thomas. Listen for distress. I do what I'm told. I walk the same halls. I hear the same sounds. And when I write my report, it always ends the same way. Everything normal, no entry required. But sometimes when I pass the old mirror near the stairwell, I catch my reflection. He's older than I am. His uniform is torn, his eyes sunken, and every time I blink, he blinks a second later, like he's waiting for me to finish first. I've tried to stop coming, tried to leave, but somehow every night I wake up in the maintenance office, the clipboard waiting, the clock stuck at 11 p.m., and outside, behind those 3 basement doors, I still hear the same sounds, the humming from 47A, the typing from 47B, the silence from 47C. Sometimes I think if I open one, it'll finally end, but then I remember the warden's last words before he disappeared for good, or for now. The night shift isn't a job, Thomas. It's a condition. And now, when I walk those halls, I can't tell which version of me is doing the work, the one carrying the flashlight or the one behind the door, typing endlessly in the dark.
I took the job at Blackwoods Sanitarium in the fall of 1990. It was an isolated psychiatric facility hidden deep in the New England woods. An old building with black iron gates and a reputation that made most doctors keep their distance. But I wasn't most doctors. Fresh out of residency and desperate to prove myself, I accepted the offer immediately. The salary was generous, the research program sounded revolutionary, and the director, Dr. Ingrid Olsen, spoke with the kind of confidence that made you believe everything she said. She called it total sensory dissolution, a new form of treatment, she claimed, that could cure even the most severe anxiety disorders by stripping away all external stimuli, every sound, every flicker of light, every sensation of the outside world. "We're not trying to silence the mind," she told me. "We're trying to make it listen to itself." I should have known that kind of silence isn't meant for anyone. The treatment rooms, called the quiet rooms, were in the old quarantine wing, sealed off from the rest of the building. Each chamber contained a floating tank, a deep pod filled with warm saline water. The patient would float weightlessly inside for hours, submerged in darkness, wearing a breathing mask and sensory monitors. My role was to observe, record vitals, and note any psychological shifts. The first patient I was assigned to was a woman named Sarah Jenkins, a former opera singer crippled by social anxiety. Her voice had once filled grand theaters. Now she barely spoke above a whisper. She told me she was terrified of silence. It's never really empty," she said quietly. "Something's always listening." Dr. Olsen smiled when she heard that. "Perfect candidate," she said. Sarah floated in the tank for 40 minutes. Her heart rate stayed steady, her breathing calm. When we brought her out, she said she'd felt peaceful, almost weightless. But that night, she woke up screaming in her room. When I got there, she was curled up in the corner, clutching her ears. It wasn't quiet," she whispered. "There was something under me, breathing." Olsen dismissed it as a hallucination triggered by withdrawal from external noise. "The brain invents stimuli when deprived. It's a natural response." Still, I couldn't shake the look on Sarah's face. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Olsen increased the time, 2 hours in total isolation. Sarah protested, but Olsen insisted. I stayed by the monitors, watching her vitals climb and fall. Around the 90-minute mark, her heart rate suddenly spiked from 128 to almost 145 BPM. I turned to Olsen. "Something's wrong." She didn't look concerned. "It's the breakthrough," she said. Then, through the intercom, Sarah began whispering, "It's not mine." "What isn't?" I asked. She started thrashing. The water sensors flickered. "The heartbeat! It's not mine!" We pulled her out, shaking, dripping with salt water. Her skin was freezing cold. She clutched my sleeve and whispered, "It was under me. The heartbeat. I could taste it. Like blood." Olsen ordered me to sedate her immediately. The next day, Olsen told me we'd continue, against my objections. "You're here to observe, not to moralize," she said. This time, I secretly installed a small camera inside the quiet room, hidden beneath the monitoring console. I had to know what was happening. Sarah floated for almost 3 hours. At first, nothing unusual, steady breathing, occasional muscle twitch. Then, at 2 hours and 47 minutes, the footage changed. The surface of the water rippled, not from her movement, but from below. The fluid level began to drop, like something massive was displacing it from underneath. Then, just for a moment, 2 faint reflections appeared, eyes open and staring straight up towards the camera from beneath her body. A low sound, almost like a heartbeat, pulsed through the speakers, and then a wet, whispering voice said something that made my stomach twist. "Hello, Sarah. Do you remember the sound you made when you died?" Sarah jerked awake inside the tank, screaming. Olsen ran in, furious that I'd recorded it. She ripped the tape from the machine, her hands shaking. "You've compromised the experiment! This footage will not leave this building!" She locked a recording in her office. That night, I broke in. I had to see what she was hiding. Inside her file cabinet were blueprints for the quiet rooms, detailed schematics, and there, buried under the technical diagrams, was a note written in Olson's handwriting. Beneath the foundation, the cistern remains intact. Flow diverted. Subject 3 reported voices from below. I didn't understand until I cross-checked the building's records. Before it was a psychiatric facility, Blackwood had been a cholera quarantine hospital in the 1800s. Hundreds died there. Their bodies were stored in underground cisterns, large saltwater basins directly beneath the current isolation chambers. The quiet rooms weren't isolating patients from the world. They were connecting them to what was buried beneath it. The next morning I confronted Olson. She didn't deny it. The human mind, she said coldly, isn't just a product of neurons. It's a frequency, a vibration, and death doesn't end vibration. It just changes its range. I'd said you're using the patients to tune in. She smiled faintly, and they're answering. Before I could say more, she stepped closer. You've seen too much, Dr. Vance. Consider this your final day. I packed my things and left, but I took the backup tape I'd secretly made from the observation feed. I never watched it again until years later. On the footage, Sarah floats silently in the dark. Then, just before the fluid drops, her lips move. At first, I thought she was praying, but when I slowed it down, I realized she was speaking. It's waiting for her to leave so it can talk to you instead. Then, at the very end, a faint reflection in the tank glass, my own face, staring down into the water. Only it wasn't my expression. It was smiling. A month after I left, Blackwood Sanitarium closed for infrastructure failure. Olson vanished. No resignation, no forwarding address. The facility was quietly sold to a private company. I thought that was the end of it. Until last winter, when I received a package, no sender name. Inside was a VHS tape labeled Quiet Room Footage 1990. It was my recording, but not the same version. The timestamp extended beyond what I remembered. At the end, after Sarah's screams fade, the tank remains still. Then, slowly, a figure emerges from the water. Not Sarah, but something wearing her face. It steps towards the camera, dripping, eyes black and hollow. Then it speaks in Olson's voice. "Welcome back, Dr. Vance. Your room is ready." I burned the tape that night, but the sound, that low, wet heartbeat, still echoes in my ears. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can taste salt water. I checked the land records last week. The new company that bought Blackwood is called Quiet Mind Therapeutics. Their slogan? Discover peace in absolute silence. I haven't slept since reading it, because deep down, I know the truth. The quiet rooms never isolated the mind. They opened the door to something that was never meant to be heard. And once you've heard it, silence is never silent again.
When I first stepped into the ruins of Greystone State Hospital, it felt like the air itself remembered. It was March 2016, and I was there to film a short documentary about forgotten mental institutions. Most people came to places like this for ghost stories. I came for history. But I left with something much darker. The building was massive, 12 stories of crumbling brick and empty windows. I had special permission from the local heritage office to film the electroshock ward, once run by a man named Dr. Edmund Farrow. I didn't know his name would follow me home. The first day of filming went smoothly, just dusty hallways, peeling paint, and the occasional pigeon flapping through the rafters. That night, I decided to leave 3 audio recorders running in different rooms. I wanted to capture the building's night sounds, the hum of wind through the broken windows, the distant creaks, the silence of old history. When I came back the next morning, one of the recorders had stopped working. The second one was fine. But the third, the one I'd left inside the electroshock therapy room, played something I'll never forget. At first, there was static. Then, faintly, a woman's voice, whispering a list of names. Old-fashioned names. Margaret, Ruth, Lillian. The last name she said was my own, Brian Novak. I froze. My name hadn't been anywhere near that building. Not on the documents, not on the permits. I'd used an alias for filming. I thought maybe someone was pranking me, but there was no one else there. That night, I went back. I wanted to prove it was just sound contamination, a recording glitch. I left another recorder, this time on the restraint chair in the therapy room. It was heavy and rusted, the leather straps still stiff from decades of disuse. Around midnight, I heard something, a soft humming sound. It came from the observation booth, sealed behind a glass wall. I shone my flashlight towards it, and I swear I saw movement, just a shadow shifting behind the fogged glass. When I approached, I noticed something strange. The thick tape seal over the observation door had been peeled back at one corner. The seal was supposed to be untouched since 1959. That's when I decided to leave. When I came back the next morning, the recorder was gone. I searched the room for hours, then gave up. As I was packing to leave, I noticed something scratched into the chair's metal armrest. Just 2 words. She knows. A week later, the police contacted me. They'd found my missing recorder. It was inside the sealed observation room. When they opened it, the air inside smelled like old copper and ozone. The recorder was sitting on the floor, perfectly clean. The timestamp was wrong. It said it had been recording the previous night, the same night I saw that shadow move. They played the audio for me. It was my voice, calm, steady, explaining a series of medical procedures. The only problem was I had never said those words. Patient exhibits temporal displacement, administering current at 50% capacity. Then another voice, soft, female, humming the same tune I'd heard in the hallway. The officer paused the tape. He said, "That voice doesn't match yours or anyone in the database." They gave me back the recorder. I wish they hadn't. I decided to dig into the hospital's history. According to the old patient records, Dr. Edmund Farrow had run hundreds of electroshock sessions from 1948 to 1959. His wife, Frances Farrow, was listed as his assistant until she died suddenly in 1959 after a power malfunction during a treatment. No other details. No death certificate, just a single note. Equipment failure. Subject, F. Farrow, deceased. But here's the thing. Her body was never recovered. I also found something else in the city archive. A box of old reel-to-reel tapes labeled Patient Sessions. One of them was marked in red ink. Session number 132, F. Farrow. When I played it, the tape crackled. Then a woman's voice began to hum the same tune. After about a minute, a man spoke. "Increase current to 80%. Don't stop humming, Francis. The patients respond better that way." Then the hum stopped, replaced by a sharp gasp and the sound of something shattering. The last thing I heard was the man shouting, "Francis!" The tape ended abruptly. I shut it off. But the next morning, when I checked my email, I found a new message in my inbox with no sender name, no subject, no timestamp, just a single attached audio file. When I played it, it was my voice again, older, weaker, saying, "Dr. Farrow, I think I have finally stabilized the current." And at the end, the same woman's voice whispered, "You shouldn't have listened, Brian." I went back one last time. I had to see for myself. The hospital was darker now, colder. My flashlight flickered constantly. When I entered the therapy ward, the restraint chair was gone. The cables were cut, the floor scraped clean. But on the wall, written in dust, were two names: Francis Farrow, Brian Novak. I called out, "Who's there?" That's when I heard the hum again. It was coming from inside the sealed room. I pressed my ear to the door. It sounded closer, like someone was right on the other side. Then, faintly, a voice said my name. "Brian, we're not finished." The lights flickered, and the metal door vibrated like something was pressing against it from the inside. I ran. The police found me outside, sitting on the pavement, shaking. They went in to check. When they returned, they said the sealed door hadn't been touched in decades, not even scratched. But they found something inside the observation booth, a small box of reel tapes, each labeled with a name. And the last one said, "Session number 134. Patient Brian Novak." They also found fingerprints on the tape recorder inside the room. My fingerprints. But I hadn't been in there. At least, I don't think I had. 2 years later, a journalist working on a podcast about Greystone reached out to me. He'd gotten permission to access the evidence box. He wanted to play me something. It was a new tape, found mislabeled in the archive. The date read April 1959. On the tape, a man's voice, mine again, spoke slowly, describing his treatment progress. He mentioned Francis by name. Then the woman's voice interrupted. "Session complete. Patient Brian Novak, admitted March 2016, discharged April 1959. The journalist laughed nervously. "It's a hoax, right? Someone edited your voice into old tape?" I didn't answer because I recognized the humming in the background, the same tune that had haunted every recording, the one I still hear when I try to sleep. Sometimes I dream of a bright light, a crackling sound, and the smell of ozone, and I see her, Francis Farrow, standing in that room, smiling gently as she adjusts the voltage. Then she leans close to me and says, "Don't worry, doctor. We've cured the time between us." And when I wake up, there's always the faint smell of burnt metal in the air.
I still remember the night it happened. December 12th, 2022. The night my best friend, Kyle Brenner, went into the old Whitmore State Hospital to film his final live stream. We'd been roommates since college, both obsessed with paranormal stuff. Abandoned prisons, haunted hotels, tunnels under cities. But Whitmore was different. It wasn't just haunted, it was dangerous. Locals said the place didn't just echo, it answered back. The hospital had been shut down since the 1940s after the lobotomy experiments. Dozens of patients died in that surgical wing. Some said the doctors used hand drills instead of scalpels. Kyle wanted to catch proof. "It's perfect for the Christmas special," he told me, grinning as he packed his camera gear. I told him not to go. He laughed. "If I don't come back," he said, "just promise you'll watch the footage." He started streaming around 10 p.m. I was watching live along with thousands of viewers. The screen flickered as his flashlight moved down the narrow hallway. You could hear the crunch of glass under his boots. "All right, guys," he said, out of breath, "we're inside the Whitmore surgical wing. Look at this. The old operating tables are still here. It's freezing, even with the doors closed." Comments flooded the chat. "This is insane," or "I see something move," or "Turn around." At first, it was the usual ghost hunt stuff – dust, shadows, noises. But then about 20 minutes in, something changed. Kyle stopped suddenly. The camera panned to the end of the hallway where a metal cabinet door slowly creaked open. He froze. "I didn't touch that," he whispered. "There's no wind here." The chat went wild. People started typing that they could hear humming, but through my speakers, I heard nothing, just static. Then someone typed, "Look behind the cabinet! Fingers!" I thought it was a prank until Kyle said, "Wait, who's in here?" and pointed the light back. Nothing. Just that cabinet, slightly swinging like it had been touched a second ago. He entered what used to be the surgeon's office. On the desk was an old recorder and a cracked mirror. Kyle leaned toward the camera and said, "All right, guys, let's see if ghosts still work the night shift." He hit the record button on the desk. His own voice began playing back immediately, but from somewhere else in the room. The same words, just a half-second delay. He stared into the camera. "Okay, that's not possible," he said. "That thing's not plugged in." Then his reflection in the mirror smiled. But Kyle didn't. I remember typing "Get out!" over and over in the chat. But he kept going. The next part still doesn't make sense. Kyle turned a corner into a long, empty hallway. The camera shook as he moved the light. For a few seconds, the frame went dark. When it came back on, we all saw them, 3 figures standing motionless, facing the wall. They were wearing what looked like hospital gowns. "Kyle," I whispered to my screen, even though he couldn't hear me. They didn't react to the light. They didn't breathe. The chat exploded with panic. Then, Kyle's flashlight died. The camera switched to night vision automatically, and the figures were gone. In their place, faint handprints appeared on the walls, glowing green under the infrared. The same pattern repeated, both hands pressed flat, dragging down. Kyle whispered, "They're behind me." The stream glitched, static lines, flickers of white, and when it came back, the camera was on the ground, tilted sideways. The operating table in the background had its straps standing upright as if held by invisible hands. Then a whisper came through, soft but clear. "Don't turn off the light." The stream ended there. Just black screen. Viewers thought it was fake. Some said it was genius marketing. But Kyle didn't post again. His channel went silent. The police searched the site the next morning. They found his bag, his flashlight, his GoPro, and his laptop, all piled neatly on the operating table. The strange part, the GoPro still had power. The footage on it was impossible. The video card was a standard 16-hour card, but it contained 43 hours of continuous recording. The timestamps jumped from 2022 to 1947. I met the detective who worked the case, off the record. He said they found images showing rooms that didn't exist anymore, rooms that had been demolished decades ago. And in one frame, there was a group of doctors in surgical masks staring straight into the camera. But Kyle wasn't there. 5 days later, he was found wandering along a highway 60 miles away. His clothes were shredded, his hands covered in surgical iodine stains. When the police tried to question him, he screamed for hours. The only sentence they got from him was, "They're still performing procedures." He was diagnosed with acute psychosis and admitted to St. Mary's Psychiatric Ward. When I visited him, he didn't recognize me at first. His eyes darted everywhere like he was still in that hallway. He whispered, "They don't stop when the lights go out." I asked who. "The doctors," he said. "They never left. They're in the walls." He grabbed my wrist, his nails digging into my skin. He said, "I saw them move between the bricks. They cut time open like surgery. They kept asking what year it was." That was the last time I saw him. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the city archive office. I'd requested access to the old demolition records for Whitmore Hospital. The archivist sounded confused. "Sir," she said, "Whitmore was demolished in 2021. There's nothing there to explore." I told her that couldn't be right. Kyle streamed from inside it. I'd seen the rooms, the hallways, everything. She emailed me the documents. They showed bulldozer permits, demolition photos, and the empty lot, all dated a full year before Kyle's stream. It made no sense. If the building was gone, what did he walk into? A month later, one of Kyle's subscribers sent me a clip from his live stream that had been automatically saved to the cloud. I almost didn't watch it. At first, it was just the same footage, the hallways, the mirror, the figures. But near the end, when the video glitched, I noticed something. In one frame, for just a half second, the camera faced the operating table. On it lay a man in modern clothes, Kyle's clothes, with electrodes taped to his head. And standing beside the table was Kyle himself, wearing an old doctor's coat. He leaned toward the camera, eyes completely black, and whispered again, "Don't turn off the light." Then the feed cut to static. It's been nearly a year since that night. Whitmore's grounds are fenced off now. Construction crews refuse to work there after dark. They say their tools move on their own. I've watched the footage hundreds of times. Every frame, every sound. I can't explain any of it. But sometimes when I pause the video, I see something that wasn't there before. A reflection in the window, a movement in the corner. And last night, when I turned off my monitor, the screen stayed faintly lit. For just a second, I saw Kyle's face staring back at me through the black glass. He smiled and whispered the same phrase, faint and distant, like the echo of an old recording. "Don't turn off the light. Don't turn off the light."
I've worked as a psychiatric nurse for 23 years. I've seen everything. Screaming patients, violent breakdowns, suicides that you can't unsee. But nothing, not even the worst nights, prepared me for what happened in Riverside Memorial's West Wing in 2015.
Back then, we had a new psychiatrist, Dr. Warren Steinberg. He wasn't like the others. Tall, sharp suit, perfect posture. He spoke softly, but there was something off in his eyes, something that said he enjoyed watching people unravel. He called his approach exposure therapy, but it was unlike anything I'd seen. He believed that to cure fear, you had to drown in it. That's how it started, and how one woman lost her life to something far worse than fear. Her name was Natalie Foster, 30 years old, admitted after a dissociative episode where she claimed she had died but never came back. She'd stopped responding to people, spoke in whispers, and constantly asked if she was visible. Dr. Steinberg was fascinated by her. He said she wasn't delusional, just stuck between two realities. We can bring her back, he told us, but first she has to confront death. I should have walked out of that room right then. It began small. He had Natalie sit in the morgue for an hour every night to desensitize her to death, he said. Cameras monitored her from a small observation booth where we watched. At first, she said quietly, trembling under a hospital blanket, eyes locked on the covered bodies around her. She whispered things, prayers maybe, or apologies. But by the third night, something changed. She stopped trembling, stopped talking, just stared at one particular drawer on the far wall, drawer number 7. When Steinberg asked her what she saw, she said, "Me, I'm in there." He smiled like a proud teacher. "Progress," he said. He increased the sessions, 2 hours, then 4, then full nights. The morgue lights were dim, flickering from the old wiring. She refused food, claimed she didn't need it anymore. One day, I noticed her body temperature was abnormally low, 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Her skin looked grayish, lips pale. When I mentioned it, Steinberg brushed it off. He said, psychosomatic response. Her mind believes she's closer to death. He wanted to push her further. He installed a microphone in the morgue so he could speak to her through the intercom while she was alone. I was there when he did it. "Natalie," his voice crackled through the speaker, "death isn't real if you understand it. You can walk with it. You can be it." Her head tilted slightly, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. That night, the security feed glitched. For about 20 seconds, the cameras went black. When the screen returned, Natalie was standing beside drawer 7, her hand resting on the handle. The next morning, she told us that the real Natalie had spoken to her from inside the drawer. "She's been waiting for me," she said calmly. "She said I can come back when I learn to breathe like her." Steinberg was thrilled. He called it a psycho-spiritual breakthrough. I called it insanity. Over the next week, the patients on the ward started complaining about a smell. Not the usual hospital chemical odor, something else, sweet, rotting, like old flowers and meat. It was strongest near Natalie's room. When I checked on her, she was sitting on the floor wrapped in a sheet. Her eyes were half open, and her skin had turned an ashy gray. "You smell like them," she whispered when I walked in. "Like the ones who left." Her body temperature had dropped to 76 degrees Fahrenheit. I rushed to call Steinberg, but he told me not to interfere. "She's shedding her old self," he said. I told him she'd die if we didn't intervene. He smiled. "That's the point." It was raining the night he brought her back to the morgue for what he called the final exposure. He told the staff to leave early. Only I stayed, out of guilt more than loyalty. He wired her up to a heart monitor and told her to lie down on one of the empty tables. Then he dimmed the lights and whispered to her through the intercom, "You're not alive. You're not dead. You're in between. That's where truth lives. The monitor beeped slower and slower. Her breath became shallow, then stopped. For 3 minutes the line was flat. Then, suddenly, she gasped, eyes wide, staring straight into the camera. "She's awake," I said. But Steinberg looked confused. "No," he murmured. "She's listening." Natalie sat up slowly, her body rigid like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. Her lips parted. "She's here," she whispered. "Who's here?" I asked. "The real Natalie," she said. "She told me to trade places." Before I could move, the lights went out. Total darkness. When they flickered back on, Natalie was gone. The table was empty. Drawer 7, the one she always stared at, was slightly open. Inside was a fresh body, pale, still, with a hospital bracelet that read Natalie Foster. Security arrived minutes later. They searched everywhere, found no sign of her. Steinberg insisted it was a staged psychotic episode, but when we checked the footage, the part where the lights went out was missing. The video jumped from 10:47 p.m. to 10:53 p.m., 6 full minutes gone. 2 days later, Natalie was found sitting in the corner of her room, silent and motionless. Her skin was still cold, her pulse faint but steady. She wouldn't speak, eat, or even blink much. She just stared at the wall and sometimes smiled, whispering to someone who wasn't there. When I asked her what she was doing, she said, "Waiting." She said, "My appointment isn't over yet." Her body temperature never rose above 80 degrees Fahrenheit again. Steinberg was suspended after an internal review. He tried to defend himself, claiming Natalie had transcended biological limits. The board called it malpractice. He lost his license. But before he left, he came to me and said something that still chills me. "You think I failed her? You're wrong. She completed the transition. You'll see when she calls for you." Riverside's West Wing is shut down now. They keep it locked, claiming it's unsafe due to ventilation issues. But sometimes when I work the night shift, the cameras flicker for a second, just like they used to during her sessions. And in the monitor's grainy feed, I see her, Natalie, sitting on that cold table, whispering, her lips moving in rhythm with the sound of the morgue refrigerator. Last week I walked past the old wing. The smell was back, faint, sweet, and rotting. And on the floor near the locked door was a single toe tag with faded writing. It read, "Appointment, 12 p.m., today's date."
I was 23 when I started working at Pinewood Behavioral Center, deep in rural Pennsylvania. It was 1982, back when asylums still felt like prisons disguised as hospitals. Pinewood was small, only 40 patients, but the building itself was huge, cold and echoing, a red brick labyrinth surrounded by thick pine forest. On my second week, a violent storm rolled in, the kind that tears trees from their roots and knocks out power for miles. That's the night we locked Jimmy in Isolation Room 9. He was 29, bipolar, smart as hell, but fragile, always talking about patterns, numbers, and the language hidden in light. The senior nurse said he'd gone manic again, yelling that the lights were counting. We sedated him lightly, locked him in room 9, and prayed the power wouldn't fail. It did. By 10 p.m. the storm hit hard. Thunder rattled the roof, rain poured down the windows like boiling oil. The emergency generator powered only a few hallway lights, leaving most of the wing in flickering darkness. Mr. Donovan, the administrator, gathered us in the main office. "Nobody goes into isolation during the outage," he barked. "It's protocol." "But Jimmy's alone. He's terrified of the dark," I said. Donovan glared at me. "Then he'll face it. We can't risk anyone getting hurt." For 48 hours, that order stayed in place. No checks, no food delivery. Just the faint red light of the emergency bulb outside room 9, flickering through the corridor like a heartbeat. By the second night, the smell of damp and sweat filled the wing. I couldn't stand it anymore. When the power finally came back, I grabbed Carl, the night supervisor, and said, "We're checking on him." He hesitated, then nodded. We walked down the long hall, the tiles still wet from the storm. The smell got worse with every step, metallic and sour. When we reached room 9, the bulb above the door had burned out. The air around it was freezing. I slid the viewing panel open. Jimmy was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, eyes open but empty. His skin was pale, lips cracked. The walls were covered in smeared numbers, written in what looked like blood. 7, 14, 21, 23, 23, 23. They repeated again and again across every wall, even on the ceiling. The padding was shredded. The light fixture was broken, wires hanging down like veins. Carl whispered, "Jesus Christ." When we opened the door, the smell hit like rot mixed with iron. Jimmy didn't react. Not a word. His pulse was weak but steady. Then I saw his arms, covered in oval-shaped bruises, perfect, symmetrical, evenly spaced. They looked like fingerprints, but too wide apart, like whatever held him didn't have normal hands. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight. His lips trembled and he whispered, "Don't let it count again." We rushed him to the infirmary. His blood pressure was dangerously low, and he refused to sleep. Every time his eyes closed, he started screaming, short, gasping words. 7, 14. It stopped at 23. When I asked what he meant, he said, "It comes when the lights die. It finishes the pattern." He wouldn't say what "it" was. The next morning, I filed an incident report. Donovan tore it up in front of me. He said, "No one outside this building hears about this. Do you understand?" 2 days later, a state investigator came. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint about patient neglect. The first thing he did was check the hallway cameras. Every single one had been cut. Not damaged, deliberately disconnected. The logs showed the feed ended 20 minutes before the blackout. That wasn't all. The door lock record showed no entries or exits from room 9 during the entire 2-day storm, meaning no one went in, no one came out. But someone, or something, had been inside. About a week later, a janitor named Lewis came to me, pale as a ghost. "You need to see this," he whispered. He led me down to the basement, a maze of old pipes and concrete tunnels that hadn't been used in decades. In one corner, behind a collapsed wall, we found a tiny living space, a cot, a lantern, notebooks. They belonged to Paul Garrett, a former maintenance worker who'd gone missing 6 years earlier. The notebooks were filled with numbers, long, obsessive lists, and notes like, "The lights are the signal. Room 9 is prepared. The connection completes at 23.
The last page said, "He will understand when the lights go out." That same night, Jimmy suffered a seizure in his sleep. When he woke up, he whispered, he finished counting. Then his heart stopped for 30 seconds before restarting on its own. When he recovered, he was different, completely blank. No emotion, no response, just vacant eyes, like someone had switched him off. The official report said psychotic self-harm during power failure, but the bruises didn't match self-inflicted marks. They were too precise, evenly spaced around his arms, shoulders, and neck. I demanded an external review. Donovan shut it down, saying it would bring unnecessary attention. The investigator returned one last time, holding a manila folder. Inside were photos from Paul Garrett's old employee file. In one picture, Garrett stood beside an electrical panel, the same one controlling the isolation wing's lighting. Behind him, barely visible in the grainy background, was a dark shape. A tall outline, almost human but stretched and wrong. The investigator looked shaken. He asked, "Do you know what this looks like?" I didn't answer, because I already knew. It looked like the bruises on Jimmy's body. A month later, Room 9 was sealed. Jimmy was transferred to another facility. I stayed on for another year, but the nightmares never stopped. One night during rounds, the hallway lights flickered again. Just for a second, but that was enough. I heard something faint, a rhythm, tapping inside the walls. 7 taps, then 14, then 21, then silence. I walked slowly toward Room 9. Even sealed, I could feel the cold seeping through the door. My flashlight trembled. The door's viewing panel was covered from the inside, taped with old newspaper. But as I leaned closer, I saw a shadow move behind it. Not big, just a flicker, like someone pacing. Then 3 soft knocks. 1, 2, 3. Then a voice, muffled, but clear. "It's 23 again." I ran. They closed Pinewood in 1989 after reports of structural decay. I never went back. But last year, a local reporter tracked me down. She was writing a piece on abandoned psychiatric hospitals and wanted to know about Room 9. I told her everything. She smiled politely, thanked me, and left. A week later, she called. Her voice was shaking. She said, "I found something. The isolation wing still has power, and the light in Room 9, it's been on since the storm of '82. Then the line went dead. 2 days later, her body was found near the property fence. The coroner said, cardiac arrest. But her arms, they were covered in bruises, oval-shaped, perfectly spaced. And when I saw the photo in the paper, my blood ran cold. On the wall behind her, faint but visible, someone had written in red paint, 7, 14, 21, 23. Below it, 4 new numbers, 23, 23, 23, 23.
When I first started volunteering at the Cedar Crest Institute, I thought it was just another care facility for the elderly, a quiet place tucked into the hills where people spent their final years surrounded by gentle music and polished floors. It didn't feel haunted, not at first. My name is Claire Davies, and I worked there for 6 months before I realized Cedar Crest wasn't trying to help people remember. It was teaching them how to forget permanently. She was the first patient I truly connected with. Eleanor, a frail woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to flicker between lifetimes. She had amnesia, total loss of personal history. She couldn't remember her family, her hometown, or even her own birthday. But sometimes she'd hum tunes from the 1940s with perfect rhythm. Every day she sat by the window, staring at the gardens like she was waiting for something, or someone. One afternoon, during art therapy, she accidentally knocked over a vase. It shattered across the floor, scattering pieces of glass and, strangely, something hidden underneath. It was a tiny, water-damaged photograph wedged between the floorboards. 5 nurses from the 1960s stood smiling in front of the same building we were in now, Cedar Crest. But when Eleanor looked at it, her entire expression changed. Her breathing quickened, her posture stiffened. Then in a voice sharper and colder than I'd ever heard from her, she said, "Why did you bring me this, Milton?" There were no staff members by that name, and yet she looked directly at Dr. Julian Hayes, the head physician, who just happened to be standing nearby. Dr. Hayes froze for a moment, then smiled tightly. "She's just confused," he said, taking the photo from my hand. "Sometimes patients mix faces with memories." But Eleanor kept staring at him. Her voice deepened. "You changed your face again, didn't you?" Her words made the room colder. Everyone laughed it off, but I saw the way Hayes's hands trembled when he put the photo into his coat pocket. Later that night, Eleanor suffered what they called a dissociative episode. She screamed for hours, yelling that Milton's back, that he keeps taking their names. They sedated her and kept her isolated for observation. But I couldn't let it go. When I searched the archives, I found only one mention of a Dr. Milton Hayes from an old medical journal dated 1964. It listed him as the founder and director of Cedar Crest Institute. The photo matched. Same face, same calm smile, same sharp eyes. Only problem was, the current director, Dr. Julian Hayes, was in his 30s. I checked his personnel file. There was no record of family, no date of birth, no medical school transcripts. Just a note, legacy position, hereditary transfer. When I asked the head nurse about it, she said something that chilled me. "Oh yes, Dr. Hayes' grandfather ran this place back in the day, but he's nothing like him. The new Hayes is wonderful." Wonderful. That was exactly the word Eleanor used when she described him, but not kindly. A few days later, I found the same photograph slipped under my locker door. It wasn't the same copy. This one was clearer, less faded, and this time there was someone else in it. Eleanor, standing in the background, much younger, wearing the same nurse's uniform. The back of the photo had a handwritten note. "Memory belongs to the living." That night, I went to Eleanor's room to ask her about it. She was awake, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling. Before I could speak, she whispered, "He keeps all of us in there." "In where?" I asked. She turned her head slowly toward me. "The photographs." The next morning, I confronted Dr. Hayes. He listened calmly, smiling as I showed him the photo. "I think there's something wrong with these archives. Why is she in a 60-year-old photograph? Why do you look exactly like him?" he finished for me, still smiling. For the first time, I noticed something unsettling. His office walls were lined with hundreds of framed photographs, staff portraits, patient ceremonies, group therapy sessions. All of them in black and white. all of them labeled with names and dates, most from the 1960s. When I leaned closer, I recognized a few faces. Eleanor, younger, several current patients, even a few nurses who'd left recently. Each photo had the same faint mark at the corner, a handwritten name, Milton. Dr. Hayes followed my eyes and said softly, "You see, Claire, our patients come here to lose the burden of their past. We take away the clutter and give them peace." I stepped back. "You mean you erase them?" He smiled wider. "I prefer the word harvest." That night, I broke into his office. The photographs were gone, every frame replaced with blank paper, but his filing cabinet was still there. Inside were hundreds of identical folders, each labeled with a year, 1962, 1970, 1984, 2001, and inside each folder, a single faded photo. Every one showed a different patient, but all labeled with the same word, Milton. There was a file for Eleanor, one for the nurse who had gone missing, and one for me, even though I'd only been there 6 months. My photo was dated next week. Then I heard footsteps. I turned to see Hayes standing in the doorway, holding a syringe. He said quietly, "You shouldn't be here." I backed away, shaking. "What are you doing to them?" He sighed, as if explaining something simple to a child. "Consciousness is energy, Claire. It fades, it forgets, but with the right conditions, chemical, psychological, hypnotic, it can be transferred." He tapped his temple. "I've been very lucky to find so many lives willing to share space." Then, almost kindly, he added, "And you, Claire, you'd make a perfect host." I don't remember how I got out, just the smell of alcohol, the sting of something sharp in my neck, and the feeling of falling through time. When I woke up, it was morning. My uniform was gone, my name tag missing. I was sitting in a wheelchair in the courtyard, surrounded by elderly patients, staring blankly into the distance. A nurse I didn't recognize walked up to me and said, "Good morning, Eleanor. Time for your medicine." I tried to speak, to tell her who I really was, but no sound came out. When she handed me a small framed photo for memory therapy, I almost screamed. It was a picture of me, or rather, Claire Davies, standing beside Dr. Hayes, smiling. It's been weeks, maybe months. Time doesn't flow right here. The others, the ones who stare too long at the photographs, start repeating words that aren't theirs. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the window. It's not my face anymore. It's his. I've stopped fighting it. Fighting only makes it stronger. But when new volunteers arrive, I try to warn them. I whisper whenever I can. Don't look at the photos. Don't say your name out loud. And never trust Dr. Hayes. Last night, a new girl started in my ward. She looks young, nervous, kind. I heard her tell another nurse her name. "Claire," she said. The same name I once had. And when I turned to the window, I saw Dr. Hayes standing outside, smiling, holding a small photograph in his hands, one that was still drying. He looked up at me and mouthed the words, "Memory belongs to the living." Then he slipped the photo into his coat pocket, and for a moment, I swore I heard my own voice whisper from somewhere far away, "Welcome back, Claire." When I started working at St. Jude's Retreat for Trauma, I thought it was the safest place a therapist could be. It wasn't a hospital, more like a high-end Victorian mansion, renovated into a therapy center for young adults struggling with PTSD, selective mutism, and emotional trauma. It smelled of lavender and polish, not antiseptic. There were art rooms instead of wards, gardens instead of fences.
On paper, it was perfect. But St. Jude's didn't heal people. It collected them. My name is Julia. I was hired as an art therapist, specializing in trauma recovery through creative expression. When I first saw the place, I fell in love. The sunlit windows, the carved staircases, the quiet halls. The director told me that St. Jude's was built on understanding trauma through creation. She didn't tell me that creation sometimes looks back. Each patient was assigned a creative project. Some painted, some sculpted. But the most popular form was doll making. It started with a simple idea to help patients externalize their trauma by creating dolls that represented the people or memories that hurt them. They'd sew, paint, and dress them until the pain had shape, something they could talk to or even forgive. At least, that was the theory. 2 girls in my group stood out, Emily Price and Charlotte Dubois. Both quiet, polite, rarely smiled. Emily had witnessed a house fire that killed her parents. Charlotte had survived years of abuse in foster care. They sat side by side in the art room every day, wordless but connected, sewing in perfect silence. When their first dolls were done, I froze. They were identical. An elderly woman in a faded blue dress, wrinkled skin painted in fine detail, white hair tied back, one glass eye missing. When I asked who the doll represented, both girls gave the same answer. She takes care of us. After that, things in the retreat began to change. At night, I'd walk past the art room and find the dolls sitting on the tables, facing the door. Sometimes their heads were turned slightly, like they'd been watching. Once, a night nurse told me she'd heard faint ticking sounds inside the locked room, like a wind-up toy running down. Another time, I found the 2 dolls on the window ledge, side by side, though I was certain they'd been left in a cabinet. When I asked Emily and Charlotte about it, they both stared at the floor. Then Emily whispered, "She gets lonely when it's dark." A week later, I found a 3rd doll sitting on the main table. It was newer, the paint still glossy, the cloth clean. But no one had been assigned a new project. This one wore a miniature version of a nurse's uniform, the same one our head nurse, Miss Whitaker, wore every day. I asked the patients if anyone made it. They all shook their heads. That night, Miss Whitaker came to me, pale and shaken. She said, "Julia, someone's been in my office. Everything's fine, except this was on my desk." She held out a small box. Inside was a piece of cloth, blue and frayed, and a single glass eye. I started keeping my phone recording during therapy sessions. Something told me I needed proof. During one session, Emily started humming while sewing. The others joined in, quietly, the same strange tune, slow, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. Charlotte suddenly looked up and said, "She wants you to stop watching us." The lights flickered. Every single doll in the room, nearly 20 of them, tipped forward at once, landing on their faces. The recording picked up something else, barely audible under the hum. "Be careful with their toys." I checked the audio multiple times. The whisper wasn't any of the girls. I started digging through the archives. St. Jude's used to be an orphanage, built in the late 1800s. Back then, it was run by a woman named Agnes Whitlock, Miss Agnes in the local records. She was famous for her disciplinary methods. One report described her as cruelly obsessed with obedience. Children who disobeyed her had their toys taken away. In some cases, she would burn them in front of the other children as a lesson. There were whispers of worse things: emotional manipulation, punishments carried out in the attic, children locked in closets for days. When I found a faded photo of her in the local archive, my stomach turned. She wore a faded blue dress, and she had one glass eye. I went to the art room that late night. I needed to know the truth. The lights buzzed faintly as I opened the door. The air smelled of dust and glue, and something sweet, like rotting flowers. The dolls were arranged in a perfect circle on the floor, facing inward. In the center was a small cassette recorder. My hand trembled as I pressed play. A child's voice came through. "If you lose your toy, you lose your name. If you break her rules, she'll sew you back together." Then came the faint sound of crying, dozens of children crying together. I dropped the recorder and backed away. That's when I noticed the third doll, the one dressed like Miss Whittaker, sitting alone on the table. Its glass eye turned slightly toward me. And then the head twitched. When I came in for my shift, the art therapy room had been sealed off. Miss Whittaker had gone missing. Her car was still in the parking lot, her purse left behind. The director said she'd resigned suddenly. The patients were quiet all day. Emily and Charlotte wouldn't look at me. When I asked Emily where Miss Whittaker went, she said softly, "Angus wanted a new nurse." That night, I dreamed of the attic, children sitting in rows sewing dolls from their own torn clothes, a woman with a glass eye humming softly while she stitched. When I woke up, there was a faint tick-tick-tick sound in my apartment. It was coming from my bag. Inside was a small doll, one I had never seen before, wearing a gray cardigan and a blue lanyard with my name on it. I quit St. Jude's the next day. A month later, I read in the paper that the entire art therapy program had been discontinued. The official statement said, "To better serve our patients, we are redesigning our creative recovery approach." They burned all the dolls. Or so they said. But I know that doesn't stop things like this. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear that faint ticking sound again, the wind-up inside a toy that shouldn't exist. And once, when I turned on the light, I saw a shape standing at the end of my bed, small, child-sized, with a face painted white and a single, staring glass eye. It raised its hand and whispered in a voice that wasn't human. "Be good, Julia, or Agnes will take your toy away." The next morning, I found a note on my bedside table, written in childish handwriting. "The art room is open again."